These poor guys were caught at the wrong place at the wrong time. I'm your host Yusuf, and these are the top 10 longest prison sentences served by someone innocent. Make sure you subscribe and ring that bell to get notified whenever we upload a new video. Anyways, let's free the people. Number 10, Ricky Jackson. Ricky was actually sentenced to pass away in Cleveland, Ohio for the execution of Harold Franks. Franks was doing business outside a convenience store when a couple of people splashed him with acid, clubbed him, shot him several times, and stole money off him before getting away. Detectives received a statement from a young paperboy, Eddie Vernon, who knew Ricky Jackson and his friends, and pinned the crime on them even though his classmates said Eddie was nowhere near the crime scene. Ricky's sentence was reduced to life in prison after a technicality, but that's not much better. Ricky Jackson says, "The boy I was before prison, with all his dreams, all his intentions, he passed away the moment I was locked up." Jackson is said to have served the longest prison sentence of any US inmate who has ever been found innocent. Number 9, Richard Phillips. Richard Phillips is a tall man with broad shoulders and a habit of singing to himself, usually without words, a deep and joyful sound that seems to rise from his soul. He began singing when he was a boy, and kept singing in prison, and now sings in the car and at the dinner table, sustaining that one long note, as if nothing in the world could stop the music. 2 days after he was sentenced to life in prison in 1972, Phillips wrote a poem. It may have been the first poem he ever wrote. He was 26 years old and had left high school in 10th grade, and now, with plenty of time to wonder, he took a pencil and set his wondering down on the page. He wondered about the color of raindrops, the color of the sky, the color of his heart, the color of his words when he sang aloud, and the color of his need for someone to hold. He missed holding his children, missed lacing their shoes and wiping away their tears, and he knew the only way he'd ever return to them was to somehow prove his innocence. Well, he managed to prove his innocence, and he's now a free man. Number 8, Iwad Hakamada. On June 30th, 1966, there was a fire at the home of one of Hakamada's bosses. According to Hakamada, he helped extinguish the fire only to find the bodies of the executive, his wife, and 2 children, all stabbed until passing. About 200,000 yen in cash was stolen from the victim's residence. Hakamada was interrogated, and in August 1966, he was arrested based on his confession and a tiny amount of blood and gasoline found on a pair of pajamas he owned. According to his lawyers, Hakamada was interrogated a total of 264 hours, for as many as 16 hours a session over 23 days to obtain the confession. They added that he was denied water or toilet breaks during the interrogation. At his trial, Hakamada retracted the confession, saying police had kicked and clubbed him to obtain it, and pleaded not guilty. "I could do nothing but crouch down on the floor trying to keep from defecating. That's embarrassing," he later told his sister. "One of the interrogators put my thumb onto an ink pad, drew it to a written confession record, and ordered me, 'Write your name here,' while shouting at me, kicking me, and wrenching my arm." On March 27, 2014, Hakamada was released from prison and granted a retrial by the Shizuoka District Court. A statement from the court said there was reason to believe evidence had been fabricated in the original trial, and keeping the 78-year-old jailed while waiting on the retrial would have been unbearably unjust. In 2011, Hakamada was the longest held demise row inmate. Number 7, Kevin Strickland. April 25th, 1978, Kansas City, Missouri. A group of 4 friends were hanging out in one of their houses when all of a sudden, crash! A group of assailants began ransacking the house. All of the friends were tied up and shot, resulting in the passing of 3 of them. One woman, Cynthia Douglas, was shot in her leg and pretended to be gone from this world until the assailants left. Then she crawled out of the house. Strickland was at home, watching television. 2 suspects, Kilm Adkins and Vincent Bell, were later arrested. Bell was a childhood friend of Strickland's and lived at a house nearby. Police found a fingerprint belonging to Strickland on Bell's car. Strickland says this was because he had driven the car before, but the last time he had seen Adkins and Bell was at 5 or 6 p.m. on the night of the executions. Later, when police arrested Strickland, Douglas picked him out of a police lineup. Douglas later said that she was pressured into naming him as one of the perpetrators by detectives on the case, and until her passing in 2015, attempted to have her testimony recanted. In 2009, she emailed the Midwest Innocence Project, saying, "I am seeking info on how to help someone that was wrongfully accused. I was the only eyewitness and things were not clear back then, but now I know more and would like to help this person if I can." Douglas said police told her, "Just pick Strickland out of the lineup and we'll be done. It will all go away. You can go on and you don't have to worry about these guys no more." Adkins and Bell confessed to the executions, but said Strickland was not a participant. Strickland was in prison for 42 years. He was 18 years old when arrested and 60 when he was exonerated. Number 6, David Milgaard. Milgaard was convicted of terminating 20-year-old nursing assistant Gail Miller in 1969. When she was found on a snowbank, Milgaard and his friends Ron Wilson and Nickel John were picking up their friend Albert Cadrain. Tipped off by Cadrain, who admitted he was mostly interested in the $2,000 reward for information, British Columbia police arrested Milgaard in May 1969 and sent him back to Saskatchewan, where he was charged with Miller's execution. Cadrain testified that he had seen Milgaard return the night of Miller's slaughter in blood-stained clothing. Both Wilson and John were also called to testify against him. They had told police that they had been with Milgaard the entire day and that they believed him to be innocent, but they changed their stories for the court. Wilson later recanted his testimony, claiming that he had been told he was personally under suspicion and wanted to alleviate the pressure on himself. Milgaard was sentenced to life in prison in January 1970. Milgaard appealed his conviction several times, but was blocked both by bureaucracy and by a justice system unreceptive to those who were not willing to admit their guilt. But in July 1997, a DNA laboratory in the United Kingdom released a report confirming that fluid samples on the victim's clothing did not originate with Milgaard, for all intents and purposes, clearing Milgaard of the crime. The Saskatchewan government then apologized for the wrongful conviction, and Larry Fisher was arrested days later. Fisher had been living in Cadrain's basement at the time of the execution. Number 5, Frederick Jeffrey. On October 27, 2016, Houston police officer Gerald Goins arrested 34-year-old Frederick Jeffrey after Goins said he saw him standing outside a house on Nettleton Street in Houston, Texas. Goins claimed that he went to the home after an informant had made purchases of substances there days earlier. Goins reported that as he drove up to the house, he saw Jeffrey locking burglar bars on the front door. Goins and his partner ordered Jeffrey and another man who was on the front porch to get on the ground. Inside, Goins said the house had no appliances, very little furniture, and appeared to be a house where narcotics were prepared and sold. Goins said he recovered 4.7 grams of a substance from a table in the living room. Goins also said that Jeffrey said that his cell phone was on the table inside. A cell phone was recovered with the substances, Goins said. Jeffrey claimed he had been framed, that the substances had been planted, and that he never told Goins that his cell phone was in the house. The judge noted that Jeffrey said Goins had lied when he said that Jeffrey reported that his cell phone was inside the house. The conversation was not recorded and no other officers heard it, the judge said. Goins had failed to mention that alleged conversation in his report of the raid. He first mentioned it at Jeffrey's trial. On September 7, 2022, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals vacated Jeffrey's conviction and ordered a new trial. The appeals court said, based on the record, the trial court has determined that Goins conducted fictional substance buys, provided false information in the affidavit for the search warrant, and testified falsely at Jeffrey's trial that Jeffrey had admitted ownership of a cell phone found in close proximity to the substances in this case. The appeals court said, the trial court finds that the false evidence and testimony provided by Gerald Goins was material in that there is a reasonable likelihood that the false evidence and testimony affected the judgment of the jury. We agree. Jeffrey was released from prison that day. On November 17, 2022, the prosecution dismissed the case. Number 4, Kevin Harrington. The body of Michael Martin was found on September 27, 2002, in a field near the Parkside Apartments in Inkster, Michigan, a suburb of Detroit. Beria Stewart lived in an apartment near where Martin's body was found. She called the Inkster Police Department to report the passing, and the police took her in for questioning. At first, Stewart said she knew nothing about the shooting that ended Martin and had not heard any gunshots, but she also said that she had seen Martin, who went by the nickname Cheeseburger, hanging out on that afternoon of September 26 with 31-year-old George Clark. The police continued their questioning. Detective Anthony Abdallah told Stewart that she wasn't going anywhere until she told the truth and that her children might have to go to social services if she didn't make it home that evening. Stewart eventually told the police that she had seen Clark and 20-year-old Kevin Harrington attack Martin, kicking and punching him, as well as hitting him with a pipe before he was shot just before midnight on September 26th. She implicated only Clark during an audio-taped interview, but implicated both men in a videotaped interview. Police arrested Clark on September 27th and charged him with first-degree execution. They arrested Harrington on October 19, 2002, when he arrived home on a Greyhound bus from New Mexico. There was no evidence that Harrington and Clark knew each other beyond name or reputation, but they were tried together in Wayne County Circuit Court, beginning on January 29, 2003. Both Harrington and Clark were exonerated of any crimes. Number 3. Darryl Howard. Shortly after midnight on November 27, 1991, firefighters who were called to extinguish a blaze in an apartment at the Few Gardens Public Housing Project in Durham, North Carolina, discovered the nude bodies of 29-year-old Doris Washington and her daughter, Nishanda. An autopsy revealed that Nishanda had passed away of ligature strangulation, and Doris, who also had ligature marks on her neck, passed away of blunt force trauma. Shortly after the executions, police received reports that 29-year-old Darryl Howard, a friend of Doris Washington, who frequented the same housing complex, had been seen in the vicinity of Doris's apartment. Washington and Howard had known each other for more than 5 years, and he often gave Doris rides when she needed transportation or needed help finding Nishanda, who frequently ran away from home because of her mother's substance dealing. Evidence would later show that just days before the executions, Nishanda sought help from social workers, saying she feared for her life if she continued to live at home because her mother's substance deals were going sour. Tragically, Nishanda's plea was ignored. In June 1992, police questioned Howard, but about a different investigation. At the time, Howard was in Duke Hospital after he was shot 5 times in the back by a member of the New York Boys substance gang, which was responsible for much of the substance trade in Few Gardens. Police suspected the gang member who shot Howard was responsible for 2 other executions, but not the executions of Doris and Nishanda. Even so, Howard told the detective that he believed the New York Boys ended Doris and Nishanda. On March 31, 1995, the jury convicted Howard of 2 counts of second-degree execution and 1 count of arson. He was sentenced to 80 years in prison. On August 31, 2016, after a 3-day hearing, Judge Hudson again vacated Howard's conviction and ordered a new trial. Howard was released on bond after more than 23 years in custody. Number 2. Lester Jennings. On September 24, 2008, 23-year-old Lester Jennings was arrested in Chicago, Illinois, and charged with aggravated unlawful use of a firearm. On July 15, 2009, Jennings pled guilty in Cook County Circuit Court and was sentenced to 6 years in prison. He spent 2 years and 8 months in prison before he was released. In September 2013, the Illinois Supreme Court ruled in People v. Aguilar that the portion of the statute under which Jennings had been convicted was unconstitutional. The statute said that a person committed the offense of aggravated unlawful use of a weapon when a person carries on or about his person or in any vehicle or concealed on or about his person, except when on his land or in his abode or fixed place of business any pistol, revolver, stun gun, or taser or other firearm, and the firearm is uncased, loaded, and immediately accessible. The court held that this portion of the statute violated the right to keep and bear arms as guaranteed by the Second Amendment. In 2021, Jennings' attorney, Joel Flaxman, filed a motion to vacate the conviction based on Aguilar ruling. Number 1. Dwayne Holmes. On November 25, 2006, 22-year-old Dwayne Holmes went to a 5th-floor apartment in a building in the Ida B. Wells public housing development where the resident sold cigarettes, candy, chips, and soda. As he was standing in line, 2 Chicago police officers came up behind him, grabbed him, and searched him. When they found nothing illegal, they turned and left. On his way out of the building, Holmes was stopped in the lobby by Police Sergeant Ronald Watts, who started asking everyone in the lobby if they lived there. Eventually, Holmes later said, Watts ordered everyone in the lobby loaded into a police squadron and taken to the police station. Handcuffed to a bench, Holmes was approached by Watts, who asked him what he was doing in the building. "I told him I was visiting my brother," Holmes said. Watts had pulled some substances out of a brown envelope and started to say they were mine. I told him repeatedly that I had already been searched by other officers and they weren't mine. Watts asked if Holmes could give him some guns. I told him I had nothing to give him. Holmes said. Watts then said, "These are your substances." In 2006, Ben Baker was convicted twice, once alone and a second time with his wife, Clarissa Glenn, on charges of narcotics possession based on false testimony from Watts. In 2015, Joshua Tepfer, an attorney at the Exoneration Project at the University of Chicago Law School, filed a petition to vacate Baker's first conviction, citing the corruption of Watts and his unit. The Cook County State's Attorney's Office Conviction Integrity Unit agreed in January 2016 that Baker's first conviction should be vacated, and the petition was granted. Later in 2016, a petition filed on behalf of Baker and Glenn also granted. Beginning in December 2016, Tepfer and attorney Joel Flaxman filed motions for new trials on behalf of dozens of men and women who claimed they were falsely convicted based on the corruption of Watts and his team. The full known scope of the corrupt, more than decade-long criminal enterprise shows that Sergeant Watts led a tactical team of Chicago police officers that engaged in systematic extortion, bribery, and other crimes from as far back as the late 1990s through 2012, their motions said. Thanks for watching. Leave a like and comment if you enjoyed this video, and we'll see you next time on Crime Time, baby!